He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, Liberation Day. It is a Liberation Day show here on the Alex Marlow Show. We'll spend a lot of time with John Carney, our economic and finance editor from Breitbart, who I think is the most able communicator on all things tariffs in America at the moment. I think if you heard my conversation with Trish Regan yesterday, which I highly recommend, she's a longtime card-carrying member of the Trump fan club and still thinks that the White House is not messaging perfectly. I agree with her on this. Scott Bessent's pretty good, though. I got one. Why don't we kick things off with this one, because this was Scott Bessent on CNN with Caitlin Collins talking about some of the tariffs right after Trump's address yesterday from the Rose Garden. Check this out.
Bring your factory to the U.S.
Yeah, and obviously with the cars, all foreign-made cars imports are getting a 25% tariff starting at midnight. If half the cars coming into the United States are foreign-made, that's hard to turn around overnight, as you know. So what would you say to people in the auto industry who are worried about that timeline and how quickly that could shift?
Buy American.
And what about American-made cars and produced cars that are being made using foreign-made parts?
Well, I believe the USMCA is exempt.
Yeah, those that are compliant with this. Obviously, yes. Canada and Mexico are not on here. A lot of these are our closest allies.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So there's a lot of deep insight in there into what's really going on here. And so it's not just about tariffs, though it is, but it's also about leveraging the world, who has been bilking the American public and has been taking advantage of us. And one thing that is never asked, we never are allowed to ask the question for whatever reason, why is it okay for them to impose 90%, 150% tariffs on us and we don't impose tariffs on them? And Trump doesn't see it as equitable because it's not. He had a chart. I've got some issues with the chart. Say that, but the chart had this trade deficit to U.S. imports ratio, which was, there's some funny math there, because having a trade deficit with a country is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean we're getting rolled just because we have a deficit, because they might have stuff we want or vice versa, and it's not always going to be exactly the same. But he goes through all these countries and what they're charging us and what we intend to charge them with the new reciprocal tariffs. So everyone's getting a 10% tariff at the start. And it could go up from there based off of the nature of what we are being tariffed. For example, Vietnam's at 90% tariffs for the United States. And you have to set some sort of a new scheme, because there could be thousands of different tariff levels for each country because of the nature of certain goods are tariffed different ways. Sometimes goods are tariffed specifically at a certain level that's higher or lower than whatever is the standard. So this is what Trump's trying to do. He's trying to come up with a new plan. And in particular, he's putting the rest of the world on notice that the days of taking advantage of the American people is over, and they're going to have a more equitable trade rate if they want to continue to do business with us, and they do. It will be devastating to the world's economy. They don't. But taking a look at the stock market today, as we're recording this, is down quite a bit, but not an insane number. Carney will mention this when I talk to him in a little bit, but it was about the same as it was when Jerome Powell gave a speech in Jackson Hole where he said he was going to be tough on inflation. So that drove the stock market down the same level. So I'm not dismissing it entirely. We don't know if this is the beginning of something truly awful, but it probably is not. From my vantage point, it feels like so. And what's more, I think a lot of the stock market that we're seeing the dip is related to the fact that Trump actually went further than a lot of people would have expected. Now, for me, I spent time with President of the White House. I mentioned this, and he did talk about how he was really gung-ho on tariffs, and he was going to impose a bunch. He's looking forward to doing it. So there will be some downstream effects, but the European stock market closed down almost 3% today. So it's about the same around the world. There's a deep incentive for people to now come to the table, start working with the United States, and do this in a way that is more equitable for the American people. We're going to be reshoring. We're bringing a lot of stuff back. We're going to have better national security. And hopefully, I think we're going to be able to restore some of America's cultural cohesion that has been lost in the globalist experiment, which is a big thing. We'll get to more of this with Carney, so I will keep those thoughts there for now, but we'll spend a lot of time on this in 10 minutes or so when we bring him in. Other news items I want to get to beforehand. Layoffs have been announced And everyone is freaking out. Aside from where are these layoffs coming from? They're coming from the federal government. Furloughs from the federal government in March were huge, and they comprise almost the entirety reduction in the overall labor force is all from DOGE. The idea that we need to have permanent government bureaucrats that is the lifeblood of our economy is just totally false. Everyone was rejoicing, conservative circles, that RFK Jr. had he didn't just fire Anthony Fauci's wife from the NIH, but he did something even better. He said you can actually keep your job if you're willing to move to Alaska, and she said no. So she's out. So it's great. So this is the whole thing: is that we as a society have grown the health bureaucracy, and we've gotten less healthy. We have not solved any of our major problems. We are getting fatter. We are getting sicker. The chronic diseases are not going away. We completely botched the coronavirus response. We did everything wrong you could possibly have done wrong, from the flip-flopping on the masking to the disastrous lockdowns, which were maybe even worse than the virus. We were slow on the virus, and then we overreacted to the virus. Everything we did was wrong every step of the way. And it's because of this permanent bureaucratic class in Washington. They should not be there. They should not have permanent jobs. And it's time to clean house. So that was an awesome move, though, by RFK. He said, you can go to Alaska, keep your job, or you're out. And she says she's out. It's probably clever, too, because firing is more complicated legally. So you offer them a answer they cannot accept. So you give them an offer they cannot accept, not a offer that you can't refuse. It's an offer that you can't accept. So that's why we're seeing layoffs, and we're having a reset. It's time. It's time to reset some of the way we do things in this country, because it has just been, we are on, as Steve Bannon was the one who introduced me to this phrase, we are on a managed decline where things are getting slightly worse, slowly over time, where America's industrial base got rooted out, and we got this economy that is essentially run by the billionaire class, and then also the people on the lower end of the spectrum who are getting handouts. And that just has not been, I think, a wise move. I think we need to start restoring that working class, middle class, upper middle class that everyone says is a lifeblood of the economy, and yet we're not really treating it that way. We're treating it like it's just not the case. I'll give you one example in my neck of the woods, which is totally shocking, is that LA now has gone up to sales tax from 9.5 to 9.75%. In some cities, Lancaster and Palmdale, which is very close to where I live, just north of LA, they now have a sales tax of 11.25% for their cities, which is the highest in the country. And these are working class neighborhoods. And this is what happens when Democrats are left to their own devices, globalists are left to their own devices. And people are kind of shocked by this. The tax went into effect because we need to raise money for homelessness services. Again, another problem that we've been dealing with for my entire lifetime, and no one's made any progress whatsoever. And so the solution is to raise more revenue from the taxpayers. We've got to get out of this cycle. And if we have to jar ourselves out of it by some extreme measures where we're in uncharted territory, I'm way for it at this point, because we got the political capital with Trump. He does not have to run for re-election, and it is now time to take a stand against these types of policies. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Nike stocks plunging. And why is this? Why would Nike stock plunge? Well, because they got all these low-wage factories in China and Vietnam and Indonesia, and they're all going to get tariffed. And thus, you're going to have to start getting creative. You're going to have to start getting made in America stuff, or at least don't get stuff that's made with Uyghur slave labor. Can we commit to not getting products that are made from Uyghur slave labor? That would be very nice. So there is a lot of even in Vietnam, which is, I guess, slightly better than China, but they're using cotton from Uyghur slaves. It's just, why is that acceptable to us? It should not be acceptable. So it's a complex situation, and I understand the insecurity of it, but it is time now to start redoing some of these deals. A handshake deal for America. Ford has offered employee pricing on most of its automobiles. So this is another reaction, offering every American employee pricing on the most of their automobiles as of Wednesday. So this is something where these companies are going to have to make adjustments in this new era that we're in, with the equitable trade, with Trump's reset that he's had, Liberation Day, where they're going to have to figure out a way to operate their businesses without the same the cushy situation they had where they could just have essentially slave labor make the parts overseas and then try to import them into the country. There's lots of different ways for there's lots of different ways to achieve a trade imbalance. It's not just from the tariffs that I highlighted, but it is much simpler when products are made in America, designed in America, made for Americans, by American, for American. That is the ultimate goal. And a little bit more of that will be very healthy. And I think that if there's a little short-term struggle, then it will be worth it in the end. So let's see how bad it gets. Look, if we plunge the world into a global recession, there's going to be a lot of crow that'll be eaten by people like me and my side of the political aisle. But I just don't see it. What I see happening is the people will play ball, countries will play ball. And I think that the panic that will be felt in other nations will supersede whatever you're feeling now, whatever you're witnessing now. Let me give you a taste of the EU's response to Trump's announcement on Liberation Day. This is Ursula von der Leyen of the EU. Check this out.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe. It will be felt immediately. Millions of citizens will face higher grocery bills. Medication will cost more, as well as transportation. Inflation.
Okay, so just keep in mind who this person is. He's one of the arch globalists of the world. This is one of the most important people in all of Europe. We're talking about we are talking about a group of people who have lost their sovereignty. We are talking about people whose economy and real wages has not improved. We are talking about people whose culture has gotten worse. We're talking about people who have just no sense of national sovereignty, and they have not done anything to grow the global economy. So when you look at these people who have become dependent on, Russia for natural resources, these are some of the most economically incompetent people on the planet. And if they're fear-mongering, isn't that a good sign that maybe Trump's onto something? So, and what's going to happen is it does not have to be this way where it hurts the global economy. All you have to do is start doing a serious rolling back of your tariffs on us. And then all of a sudden, things are going to start opening up all of a sudden. So Trump is doing his art of the deal stuff. Don't take him literally yet. These countries should. But if the EU opens up to full free trade, no trade barriers, the world economy is going to boom. And we're going to have a huge reset where America is treated fairly instead of like it's the world's piggy bank. So that's why I thought this response is really important to play and just give you a sense of how good things can get. All right. Other things. Trump effect. Border apprehensions fall to historic low, down 95% from last year. So the apprehensions are good. We want those to drop because that's a signal people aren't coming. So we got to deal with all the deportations. We got to get people out of the country who are here. We got to get the Nicaragua out. We got to get the MS-13 out. We got to deal with all these judges who are just going out of their way to make sure that the criminal illegal aliens are allowed to stay. I know it's surreal, but this is the environment that we're in. That the judges, the Democrats are just trying their best to try to keep the illegal aliens here as much as they can, demanding the return of deported gang members to the U.S. John Binder's got a big story on this for us at Breitbart. I mentioned this on yesterday's show, Jamie Raskin. But they want them to come back, all the deported ones in El Salvador. That's how insane it is. But one thing that we can do that is happening, that is good news, people are getting the picture that if you come here, you don't get to automatically stay. That's step one. It's a very big step. So if people get the impression that you don't automatically get to stay in the country just because they showed up here, then that is going to make our lives a lot easier and cheaper and safer over time because there's essentially a virtual wall that's being erected by a guy named Tom Homan, him out there broadcasting to the world that if you get here, you will get deported. I will get Dr. Phil out there with you. We'll be doing the ICE raids and you're going home. Then that is a good news because it's going to solve a lot of problems down the road. Okay, other interesting stuff. There's a honeypot ban. The U.S. has warned staff in China to avoid romance and sex with locals. Good call. I like that. So you can't say, look, they got a lot of spies, or their biggest geopolitical foes. We know they're honeypotting. Ask Swalwell. So just no Chinese spies, no sleeping with Chinese spies, Americans overseas. It's a rule. All right, Amazon is now bidding for TikTok, perhaps. So that doesn't shock me. Jeff Bezos, I think, is now fallen down to the world's third richest man. I think Zuckerberg passed him by $1 billion, according to Forbes. But he's got a couple $100 billion and seems to be on better terms with Trump these days. Doesn't shock me. We got to reapprise this when it's not a super hot news moment, but we got to do some TikTok conversation, because I was just talking to another influential conservative this morning about whether or not I should be on TikTok. It's because it's like I hate it. It's Chinese spy app. But if Trump does force a sale to an American, then do we want to be on it? And I think overall these smartphone apps are they're eating our souls. They're just making us so unhappy. And I curse the day that we just decided we would have a phone-based life instead of a life-based life. But there is a reality, particularly if you're in the media business. Should you be on it? Should be into it? And I would feel, shockingly, as much as I don't love Bezos, he banned my friend Cernovich's movie, which I won't forget that, hoaxed. But it is maybe that's best case scenario. I don't know, but let's keep an eye on it. Tesla and Musk have been targeting 50 plus attacks across America now. So we're still keeping an eye on this. The widespread leftist violence. Those of you who listened to yesterday's show, I played the guy who wants to stone conservatives. Misty flagged a clip for me today on how a guy, I guess, shot someone at a Walgreens or something to oppose the drug company. Just shot a worker at the Walgreens. So I'm going to play this one. Let's see what this is like.
Chilling surveillance video. Narciso Gallardo Fernandez seen shooting at the camera just moments after allegedly killing a Walgreens employee. Police say Hernandez went to the parking lot to reload.
There is no relation between Narciso and Eric Velasquez.
Madera Police Chief Gino Chermonte says Narciso drove from Pixley, showing up at the Walgreens off Cleveland Avenue just before closing Monday.
We do know he has a general disdain or grudge against pharmacies, large-scale pharmacies.
Yeah, so this is it. So people feel like now vigilante justice is okay because of the way Luigi Mangione was received, where he is clearly a deranged individual and he shot the United Healthcare CEO, even though he wasn't the United Health customer, but he thought that he shot him in the back, literally in the street. So is even cowardly move if there ever was one. And then he's being hailed as a hero, particularly by the younger people. And I don't know if that's a prevailing view across the country. Pam Bondi's talking about getting the death penalty. I think that should be automatic if he's convicted, from my vantage point. But we're normalizing vigilante justice. Of course, there's going to be more like this. I'm surprised there hasn't been more than this to date. But that's the nature of the left. They harbor these violent tendencies. You see it with the Tesla torching. You see it with the Mangione celebration. Even Bill Burr, the comedian, the people used to like Bill Burr. And he's out there saying free Luigi. He's a murderer, it appears. Allegedly a murderer. We got to be careful on that. But this is really, really, really relevant in the sense that if we normalize violence, then society is just going to start crumbling. It's just, you have to be a society of law and order, and the left does not regard law and order as a value. Much more on that this year. I've got as part of my research I'm digging into right now, that is one of the concepts I'm exploring. They do not believe law and order is a real value, and it's important to touch base on that. So there you go. We got more violence, and it's not going to stop because they like it. They do like it. All right, I get a palate cleanser before we get to Carney. We'd have our Jasmine clip, Jazzmin, Jasmine Crockett. We got one for today. Where's my Jasmine clip? Where is she? There she is. All right, we got a good one. Let's do it.
The final thing that I'll say, because you've been gracious, is this. When I first became a public defender, I had no criminal defense experience. And I walked in and I told my boss, Charlie, I said, listen, you should hire me. He said, why? I said, because I'm black. Charlie looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, let me tell you something. When I walk in, I'm going to walk in with a level of...
So there you go. Being black is a qualification for a public defender job. When I first came as a public defender, I had no criminal defense experience. But then the being black part is really cool, I guess. I walked into my boss, Charlie, I had to listen. You should hire me. Why? Because I am black. Charlie looked at me like I'm crazy, but look at where she is now. So it's such a dated idea. I mean, we talk about affirmative action for the last 30 years, and the DEI stuff just hit such a fever pitch. And then We're just over it, but it's such a toxic thing. And you want to try to if there's anyone in your life who thinks this way, just try not to spend a lot of time with them. That's all I can say, because society's better off when we don't judge people by the content of their skin tone, their melanin. Content of your character is better. Who said that? Probably a smart guy, whoever came up with that idea. All right. One thing that is doing not so badly today, as you guys can imagine, it's gold. It's I check out the gold prices. Gold's at $31.25 as we're doing the show. Now, it's down 1% today, but the whole stock market's down 3%. And if you look at the 5-day average, it's up. 1 month, gold's up 7%. 6 months, up 16%. Over the last year, it's up 35%. If you bought gold 5 years ago, you're up 89.93% as of when I'm recording the show today. 31.25. I told you it is the smart money move if there is one. It's the easiest thing to sell. Priority Gold is a fantastic sponsor, the original sponsor of the show. Go to prioritygold.com. Text FREEDOM to 24999 for their free gold and silver guide. They will help you get invested. Gold 401k, gold IRA, tax and penalty free. You get involved right now. Silver is going to boom with the new Trump policies from my vantage point. Gold's already at 31. Goldman thinks it's going to go to 33 this year. It could go up beyond that. It is the safe play if there ever was one. I mean, it's never a bad time to buy gold when you see the economic volatility like it is right now. It makes it even more of a good moment. So go to prioritygold.com. It should be totally obvious at this point to do that. Another fantastic sponsor to mention on the show, Juvent. So we've all seen it. Friend, parent, maybe even yourself, moving slower, skipping workouts, avoiding the stairs because of pain or joint stiffness. And the reality is your mobility doesn't just vanish overnight. It's a slow decline. And by the time you notice, it could be too late to fix it. So you can start taking responsibility for your bone health now with a 60-second bone and joint health risk assessment. Helps you understand what's happening in your body before it's too late. In less than a minute, you get a personalized score, real steps you can take to stay active, strong, and independent. It's one of those things you wish you did sooner. So take that quiz now, juvent.com/Marlow, juvent.com/Marlow. This is all about your future mobility. This is a way to get your health assessed at a level that is very fast, and they can make recommendations to you. You guys know I've been on my Juvent, and it is helping me. It could help you as well. Juvent.com/Marlow, juvent.com/Marlow. Do something nice for your health. You want to have that longevity because, look, we need you. We're in the fight of our lives for this country. All right. John Carney coming up right now. Let's do it. All right. So those of you who are more seasoned citizens in the audience, you will have heard of an expression called the full Ginsburg, where you would go on all of the 4 or 5 or 6 big Sunday news shows in a row because you were such a hot guest that day. Well, John Carney is having that at Breitbart. He's on all of our Breitbart shows. He's on Breitbart Sirius XM in the morning. He's on Breitbart Confidential today, my show for our Breitbart Fight Club members. And he's on the Alex Marlow Show because it is one of the biggest days of the administration with Liberation Day yesterday. But it would have been a big mistake to have not have John on. I think he's the best analyst who is in the America First side of the aisle anywhere. So, John, let me just start at the top and thank you for sending my son an incredible book of Greek mythology. That's where the audience knew I was going to start there. But John is a very generous guy. He sent my 6-year-old an incredible book of Greek myths, and you're a very cultured guy. I think that's why I bring that up at the start.
I loved that book as a child. I read it to my own kids. It's beautifully illustrated. I have to recommend it to everybody. It's by the Diarios is their name. It's an amazing book of Greek myths. And it forms the basis actually for cultural literacy for kids. Because if you can get your kids into Greek myths, then they're going to be into Greek history, and then they're going to be into Greek philosophy, and then they're going to know about the Roman Empire, and that, this is the introduction to the West that all kids should go through is, through these crazy stories about Zeus and Apollo, and it's fantastic.
And the timeless themes are really great, and it's just fun because it just hits his brain really well. It was interesting. I had my parent-teacher conference, or both of them for my 2 kids who are in school, and it's funny. They're both totally different, and but the eldest, who is the Greek myths kid, he's apparently just really into storytelling already, and he's 6 years old. And I'm thinking that we're going to have to collaborate on a book or something, just because I think he really enjoyed just the idea of going through that creative process. But you can see that he likes it's just really hitting him in the sweet spot. So thank you for that. And it's really providing a lot of entertainment. And I agree with you. This is the beginning of understanding the West. And I think that we're losing some fundamental literacy in this stuff and should probably prioritize a little more these days.
Yeah, look, my daughter says it's been a tremendous advantage to her in school. Her teachers just think she's a genius because whenever they're talking about something in history or in English class, and the teacher's like, well, how do you react to that? She can just file into her brain where this fits into a Greek myth. And she's like, well, actually, this is a lot like the myth of asbestos. And the teachers are blown away. And she's like, Dad, it's all because of that book you gave me when I was, 5 years old. And you just, it opens up a world to them and it does impress people. And like I said, it really helps later on when you start to learn about this stuff, like in philosophy, in history, that you have this background. The Greeks aren't this alien culture to you. You realize that they're your culture.
So I have the same thing, but for me, it's all pro wrestling. It's all WWE. I just think of like Triple H and The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'm not up on it. So there's someone in the audience who knows all the real characters, but we did have a great video earlier in the week of this strange trans individual who looked like a WWE character, and they were folding chairs in the background, and I was pretty sure she was going to grab a folding chair and start hitting people over the head with it. So
backing people around.
Yeah. It's nice to elevate. It's nice to, there's so much incredible culture out of the West, and we have, whatever reason, gotten away from beauty, and maybe we're just too impatient, and we're trying to be too efficient. And I think that's a good segue, because I sometimes I look at stuff, John, like our architecture. And, as conservatives, I tend to think of us Judeo-Christian, God-fearing people. I tend to think of us as more inclined to the spiritual realm, the realm of ideas, rather than the realm of physical things and building edifices. But if you look at, for example, our architecture, the aesthetics of it are just, we're not even trying anymore. It's all about practicality, and the practicality of having efficiency. So maybe it costs a little bit less to run your heating and air, and maybe that some things are stand up to weather a little bit better. But what ends up happening is you slowly erode the soul when you're only focused on what's practical. And beauty and elevation, I think, is enriching for people and it's inspiring to people. And I think that's happened to our economic policy, is that we've just decided that the American dream is not for everyone. We've decided that so long as you have cheap imports, and you've got a 9 to 5 at an office somewhere working for a soulless corporation, then that's good enough. And I have never bought into that, but it's all been theoretical. It's all been ideas until yesterday, where all of a sudden there seems to be one individual named Donald John Trump who's going to take a big swing. And he might not hit, but he's taking a big swing to try to reset, I think, not just global trade, but what it means to be a human being in the United States of America in this century. It's really a story. I don't mean to be too philosophical and poetic about it, but it really is how it feels, John. But comment on my thesis here, and then let's get into some of the detail.
So I just want to comment on the architecture, actually, because I think that's absolutely right. Amazingly, we act like we're building practical architecture. And I know this was a metaphor, but look, we act like we're building practical architecture, but our buildings don't last as long as the Parthenon has lasted.
Yeah.
They built beautiful buildings that lasted forever. We build these horrible, supposedly functional things that fall down in 50 years and need to be replaced, right? So it's not actually better. And that actually is a good metaphor for the economy, because we built a sustainable economy. We did this thing starting with Alexander Hamilton, where we said, it's really going to matter that we make things in the United States, that we're going to build what Henry Clay called an American system. Yeah, we're going to import stuff. We weren't never not going to buy stuff from abroad, but we were going to make sure that the internal American economy was healthy, could produce a lot, provided jobs, not just for the people who can, in these days become coders or nobody's going to code anymore. It's like an outdated metaphor. People are going to be prompters for AI, but not just for people with graduate degrees, not just for somebody who is going to work on Wall Street, but for people with less education for people so that means you need an industrial base. We built that economy. We did it in the United States. We did it behind a very high tariff wall. So we had, Alexander Hamilton's tariffs. We had the Henry Clay American system. Abraham Lincoln was a pro-tariff guy, and McKinley had a very high tariff system. We kept this in place. It built America into an economic powerhouse. And so powerful, in fact, that after World War II, when the rest of the world's economies were in shambles because they'd been shooting each other for 2 world wars, we actually were able to bail out the rest of the world because of our economic strength.
Okay, perfect place to go. Okay, so let's start there. So us bailing out the rest of the world, there is basically this grand bargain that, no one in our generation was a part of, but we had decided we were essentially going to be a giant bank for the rest of the world. We were going to fund the rest of the world as almost like a global welfare program, and this would have a couple of benefits. First of all, we'd get cheap goods. Second of all, people would be, it would reduce threat to us because we wouldn't have many enemies. We'd have these tributary states. And the rest of the world could use our help because we were just so far and away the wealthiest. So that makes sense, or, among a handful of the wealthiest nations. So I understand. I'm not trying to be entirely dismissive of it. Right. But that's been in place now for going on 80 years. We've had almost no reappraisal of it as far as I can tell. Take us on the arc from where we were then and why we feel like it might be time for a change now.
So we were by far the strongest economy in the entire world, in part just because World War II wasn't fought here, right? Like, Europe's entire industrial economy was destroyed. We bombed it. They bombed it. They fought, they really did a lot of damage to themselves, and a lot of damage was done Asia, Japan, China had a civil war. So end of World War II, you have the Soviet Union, which didn't have a great economy, but it was rising. You had the United States. We said, all right, we need to make sure that the countries that side with us are the wealthiest countries in the world. We don't want them to fall for communism. So we were willing to, in a way, take one for the team to say, okay, this would be, bad for us. But fighting world wars was even worse for us. So if we can peacefully bring the world to a wealthier place, that'll be, a great thing. And we did that. We won. It totally worked. The problem was when we won, we forgot to raise the flag of victory and say, okay, everybody, come back to the table. Here's how we're going to do things now.
Right.
The way I look at what we're doing now is exactly that. Donald Trump is saying, guys, come back. We're rethinking this.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about literally what took place. So we saw a 2-tiered tariff system, sort of country specific. There's exceptions for the USMCA countries. There's a baseline rate set of 10%, but then we've calculated what we're calling a reciprocal rate, which is more of a complex calculation here. And it feels like, John, just to start playing a little bit devil's advocate here, it feels like with this chart that Trump presented, where he had three sections: tariffs charged to the U.S., U.S. discounted reciprocal tariffs, and then trade deficit versus the U.S. imports. And it is the trade deficit number is a little funky to me because inevitably we're going to have trade deficits with certain countries just based off of what they're producing, and I don't necessarily look at that as us getting rolled, and that's why I don't want to oversell things when I feel like there are good logical arguments. So talk to us about the chart that Trump put up and what's in there, what we need to know about it.
So what I would say is you are right that there can be reasons why we can have a trade deficit with a country that doesn't involve unfair trade practices and, frankly, doesn't really hurt the U.S. Most of our trade deficit with Canada, by the way, is actually a pretty benign deficit because we buy a lot of oil and natural gas from Canada. And if you take out the oil and natural gas, the trade deficit isn't really a big problem. So and there are countries like that. If we buy chocolate from, like cocoa beans from another country, then they're a very poor country, maybe they don't buy that much from us. That's not a big deal. The problem is you have some countries, actually a lot of countries, that are running systemic trade surpluses against the US, where it's not just, for a little while, it's not just like while their economy recovers. It's basically they've structured their economy to be perpetually in surplus against us to be in deficit to them. That is evidence of an unfair trading system. And that's what this is designed to remedy. It's to say to people, look, we don't care if you call it a tariff, a non-tariff barrier. We don't care if you hide it. You can hide what you're doing behind a complex web of stuff that makes it so that we're not selling into your country. We don't care how you're doing it. We're not going to let you get away with it. So you can say, oh, no, we lowered our tariffs, but oh, by the way, you still can't sell anything to our country. Yeah, well, then you don't get your tariff lowered. They have to take concrete steps to remedy the actual thing. It's a little bit like what happens to companies. If you live in a racially mixed area, but you only have one ethnicity working for your company, people say, what's going on?
Yeah.
Why don't you hire people of different ethnicities into your company? And maybe you have a good reason. Right? Maybe you can say, oh, that's the only people who ever apply or whatever it is. But there is at least a presumption, and I think a non-crazy one, that if you have a very, very large disparate impact, that there might be something going on there. Now, again, that could be a rebuttable presumption. Maybe you could say, no, you know what, actually, there's nothing we can do about it. We could only hire, people under 4 feet tall, and it turns out, everybody under 4 feet tall is from, the Oompa Loompa land. And so therefore we had to only hire Oompa Loompas. The point is that the trading system, if countries are running persistent large deficits, or their surpluses are deficits, that's evidence of a problem. And that's what we're trying to address here.
So one thing that is interesting here is that clearly we're trying to bring back some manufacturing, some reshoring, because it is a legit vulnerability that we are dependent on pharmaceuticals from China, chips from Taiwan, stuff like that. It's pretty obvious. And it does work. I will tell you that I bought, as I've mentioned on the show a couple times, 2 gigantic cars that are very expensive. Both are made in America. One of them is a German car company that made the car in America for the American consumer. And it's one of these things where it's all thanks to Trump. The previous car I had was a Japanese car that was made in America, thanks to Trump. All plants that were built since Trump's first term.
Right.
So this stuff does work, and those are good American jobs. But, people still insist, and I admit it's more upper crust people, that the Americans won't work in factories. I feel like at a gut level, I grew up in West LA. Like I had a middle class upbringing. Like I understand it at a kind of a feels level, but John, there's all these Americans working these gig economies where you're delivering stuff for DoorDash and you're driving Uber, and sure, you get to do it on your own time and you don't have to go answer to a boss. So there's some luxurious elements to it, but these are low wages. These are not dependable. You're not getting benefits. Is it really true Americans won't manufacture?
No, it's not true at all. And you're right. Look, I actually know a bunch of people from some work I do with my church and my community who their primary occupation is actually doing stuff like DoorDash. And they're not happy. It is a pretty depressing existence when you are shopping for others, hoping to make your money from a tip for them. You've basically become a servile class to people rather than being somebody who has, a job that you can really feel good about, that maybe you're part of a union, that maybe you are then able to contribute to your community. These people I don't want to call it subsistence, but they're not earning very much. They have no job security. They depend, again, on tips from people. And if they're 10 minutes late with the delivery, they don't get anything. This is not a happy existence for people.
No, and I'm not saying that there's a happiness goes beyond your career and everyone should
right.
There's dark days in any job, I'm sure, even the best of jobs. But it is one of these things where if you're involved in making an automobile and the thing looks just beautiful and pristine, and maybe you're only a small part of it, but it comes off the assembly line and you played a role, it's probably a slightly more satisfying feeling than you dropped off a $70 burger that's lukewarm and it's not even that good. It's not a great way to live.
Yeah, I knew a bunch of guys actually whose job it was in Detroit to redesign dashboards whenever they were like updating a car. These guys would come in and they loved it. If they got in your car, they could tell you who designed the dashboard. They were so proud of the work they did.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a big part of having a healthy economy is having people have jobs that they can be proud of. I think a lot of people look, I grew up in New York City, you grew up in LA. We grew up around professionals who may think like, oh, well, I don't want to work on a farm, or I don't want to work in a factory. But a lot of people actually do, especially when so I'm descended from people who didn't want to work they moved to New York City and they raised me there. They didn't want to work in a factory. They wanted to be professionals. But a lot of people, that's not the life they want to live. And the alternative, which is not everybody gets to be a lawyer, everybody gets to be an accountant, everybody gets to be a journalist, right? That you can't have that. There's not enough occupations for that. So the alternative is, instead of having people working in productive manufacturing jobs, we have them work in servile service sector jobs that don't promote a future. I actually think this is a little off topic, but I think it's very related to the declining fertility we see in the United States. People don't have a lot of hope in their own future, much less the future of any children they might have. And so they hold back. They say, I don't know, I deliver food to rich people's houses. How is that a future for me?
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, so a couple of things that I think are really important. I'm going to highlight something, and I'm just going to tell you guys, we're going to run out of time. I did 25 additional minutes with John on our Breitbart Fight Club show, I do think of this as like a companion to the show. So if you like this show, then subscribe to the Breitbart Fight Club, and then Breitbart Confidential is my interview show I do there. And I've never had the same guest on the same show, but it's a special day, and John is, again, it'd be a mistake not to talk to John. But John had an amazing Breitbart Business Digest from yesterday that I want to get into, where you respond to Olivier Blanchard, who's an MIT professor, or former MIT professor, who's really one of the most cited economists on earth. And he came out really hard against the tariffs, suggesting that this is going to plunge the economy into a recession. This is something that a lot of well-educated establishment type people have been telling me over the last 24 hours, because they know that I'm a pro-tariff guy. What's his main argument, John, and what's the main pushback?
So first of all, I just want to say, one thing I really liked about what Blanchard had done, I think he's French, so I think his name is Olivier Blanchard.
No, that's good. That's all you. You got this one. You're holding down the fort for the show on this, John.
I think he actually tweeted out my article, and I have to say, I love that. Like if you are intellectually secure enough that you're not running from criticism or trying to ignore it, but saying, here's a different point of view. So hats off to Olivier Blanchard.
Totally agree with that.
For doing that. So good for him. So, but here's his argument. His argument is twofold. One, that it creates a lot of uncertainty, that uncertainty will make businesses not invest, and therefore will slow down the economy. The other part is that it'll make prices go up, and then the Fed will raise rates, and then that will slow down the economy and also make the dollar increase in value. And therefore, the tariffs won't even work to discourage imports, because the dollar will go up so much in value that it'll overwhelm the tariffs, and people will still buy cheap foreign goods. So the problem with both of those sections, I'll start with the uncertainty. Actually, there's been papers showing. So the original paper that was like the hardcore groundwork for the idea that uncertainty caused slowness in the economy was actually by Ben Bernanke when he was a graduate student. He wrote it back in 1975.
Wow.
And economists really have latched onto that. There's some truth to it. I'm not saying it's wrong. But it turns out that's a special case of uncertainty. There are certain times where uncertainty will make people hold back. There are other times where uncertainty is actually expansive, where when you don't know what's going to happen, you invest because the opportunity may not be there in the future. And so one of the things that the tariffs can do, and this is the argument I make in my piece, is that it actually presents an opportunity to companies. Come build factories in the U.S., and you will have a leg up. You will be a first mover into trying to sell things against your competitors who are either still based abroad and are going to come here late, or aren't going to come here at all. So I actually think this is an example of expansive uncertainty. The price thing, I just don't think that we're going to get that many price increases from tariffs. And I think the Fed won't respond to any price increase we get from tariffs by raising rates. So I don't think that part of his analysis works at all. So I think both halves, the interest rate inflation part doesn't work and the uncertainty part doesn't work. When you put those together, this is one of the biggest economists in the world, and these are his objections. When you put it together, the objections don't hold water. That's very reassuring to me. When I saw Olivier Blanchard is talking about the tariffs, I said, uh-oh, right? Like, what if he's come up with something that I haven't thought of?
Yeah, and you didn't think so. That's great.
This is all stuff we can deal with.
Well, everyone should read this at Breitbart. Let me get into a couple more specifics here. First of all, stock market's down. It's down big, but I would not say this is not unprecedented. It's down 2.9% as we're having this conversation, which is not good. It's a big thing, but John, for me and you, we've been talking about how the stock market is not the precedent for the last, several years. And now Trump is acting like it. So I mean, we can live with this short term, but I want you to reassure some people who are very intimidated by this number.
Yeah. So what I would say is that, look, when Jerome Powell went to Jackson Hole and said, I'm going to get tough on inflation.
Yeah.
The NASDAQ dropped 4%. The S&P was down 3.5%. The Dow was down 3%. So in other words, sometimes you do things as correctives that people don't expect, shock the market, and stocks go down. That's what I think we're seeing right now. It doesn't mean, I have seen some people be like, well, if this was really just short-term pain, stocks would go up because stocks discount, future earnings and are supposed to be forward-looking. Yeah, sure, I hear that all the time. But they went down when Powell said he was raising interest rates. That was good for the economy. It helped squeeze out inflation. They went down, by the way, back when, I was trying to think of other instances like when people were making public speeches that made the stock market fall. So Alan Greenspan very famously talked about irrational exuberance. Stock market took it really hard when he said that. This was during the dot-com bubble in the 1990s. And it recovered. It was not a long-lasting hit. And by the way, same with Powell. The stock market recovered from the initial shock and did better. I expect that the stock market will recover from the shock of tariffs. And we will see, later when we look back on it, we'll say, oh yeah, there was that day when it went down a few percentage points. We've had those days before, and sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah, sometimes it is. And again, these are just not numbers that are totally, I think, mind-blowing, considering that the tariffs that Trump proposed were even deeper than I would have guessed. I got to tell you that, John, that I spent some time with the president 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about more tariffs. He's talking about secondary tariffs. I wasn't even fully comprehending that concept, where he would hit a tariff that he would think would kind of hit almost like a bank shot. He could hit two countries at the same time with the same tariff. And he's really into
that, by the way. You
explain it to us.
You're one of the first people to ever talk about it, Alex.
Yeah.
You kind of broke the story of secondary tariffs.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it's unfortunately it was off record, so I had to do it very casually. So I don't want to get anyone in any trouble. So I get invited to these things in the future. But it was the vibe what I felt comfortable sharing with people was that he's really into it, and he thinks that this is going to work. And he's been thinking about his legacy, and he's been talking about this for 40 years. So if he guesses right here, then it could be a world-changing thing. But what is I think intellectually, morally, I think we're righteous here. But ultimately, if people are going to suffer, we're going to have to eat some crow here politically. So what do you think are the next steps? Are we potentially looking at a nice tax cut or something to perhaps offset any short-term pain? Could that be more likely in the offing? What do you think?
Yeah, look, so the tariffs should generate hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. By some estimates, $600 billion in a single year. So that's a huge amount to use to cut taxes. Right? We can actually say, all right, let's look at what taxes people need that we could cut that would be very pro-growth. So I would bring down capital gains taxes, but I would also then use part of that extra revenue to bring down payroll taxes. Even though bringing down payroll taxes isn't necessarily hugely pro-growth, It doesn't cause like the investment in productivity the way the capital gains ones do. The problem is if you bring down capital gains taxes, it looks like you cut taxes for the rich on their investments. So you want to cut taxes on labor. The problem with that is we already cut taxes a lot on income taxes on labor. So it's really hard to cut, the working man's taxes much more with the income tax. So cut the payroll tax, cut the capital gains tax or the corporate tax, either one, and you will get both the economic boost and you'll be putting more money in working people's pockets. I think those are a great combination and a great way to offset the potential drag from the tax hike that a tariff effectively is.
You're hearing these prognostications like we could be heading towards a global depression. This could be even a intentional recession. There's some people who are really convinced that this is not going to work at all, John. What's the message to such people?
Yeah, Larry Summers, I think, said he thought it would cost $30 trillion of damage to the global economy.
Yeah, I think he said 20. I saw this tweet thread too.
It went up. No. It went up. It was 20.
Oh, it went up.
And then he raised it like a couple hours later. I mean, I love how,
of course, whenever they pick the super round number, you know that it's totally emotional. It's like it just coincidentally, it's like a perfectly rounded right to a 10.
I mean, 30 trillion is more than the entire U.S. economy. It's more than our GDP. We're 28 trillion. We used to be closer to 20, and part of me wonders whether when he first said 20, he thought that was the GDP number, but inflation helped bring it up to 30. So that he was like, no, I'm wrong. It's 30. Yeah, that's all crazy. It's not going to be a $30 trillion hole in the global economy. A lot of these people actually have a very warped view of history. The economists like Larry Summers probably don't. They probably know better, but some other people, they've been taught like that the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930 caused the Great Depression or caused the stock market crash, but stock market crashed before the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Most economic historians don't think the tariff caused the Depression at all. It was at most a minor contributor to the Depression. It was really bad monetary policy and then some bad fiscal policies that really led to the Great Depression, but not the tariffs. But I think a lot of economists have in the back of their mind this idea that tariffs are almost like a taboo, that you anger the economic gods if you invoke tariffs, and that therefore, the badness will happen, the flood, the deluge will happen to punish the tariff sinners. I'm not a believer in the God of the free market. I'm a believer in, the God who sent his only son to die on the cross for us. So I'm not going to, I think that we're going to have a deluge. And in fact, I think the opposite. I do think that we will look back on this years from now and say, this was the moment that America turned things around. It was headed in one direction and we changed it. We had that choice. We did it in the election and now we're doing it in policy.
I'm with you. A lot of it's intellectual. A little bit of it is even emotional, but it really does feel like this is a huge moment for us. And I think those of us in the America First movement, this is where we're not joking around. We've talked about these ideas for the last decade, a little bit more than a decade, since this movement, I think, really started taking off, probably circa 2014. And now it's happening. And it couldn't be more exciting. John, I am so excited that we'll be getting your play-by-play as this thing unfolds. I know we'll talk again soon. We talk again if you guys want more, and you probably do. Breitbart Fight Club for the rest, and anything John writes is a must-read at Breitbart.com. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Alex.
That is today's show. Thanks to our producer, Misty, and all of you in the audience. If you email me at aloha@alexmarlow.com, I know I haven't done email in a while because I've been scrambling. You guys can tell that, but it is my intention to, I got a stack of emails that are great. I would love to respond to some for tomorrow, Wine Shirt Friday. So it's coming up. So let's drop me a line. Leave a comment anywhere, telling 10,000 friends and family members about the show, leaving a 5-star review anywhere. All of that really helps us grow. And I can't thank you enough. Talk to you tomorrow.